The first season of Limbus Company is coming to an end once June hits, and with it I feel like I've experienced enough of the game to offer my thoughts on what it's been like, as well as what my expectations are for the second season. I'm lucky that Project Moon has released a roadmap for their future content to aid in my inferences for what's to come, so look forward to that near the end of the video. To offer credentials for what is a complete experience in Limbus Company so far, I've cleared the Battle Pass, I've finished Chapter 3 of the main story, I've finished the Hell's Chicken side story, and completed the Railway Line 1 Madness. I'm going to do my best to organize these sections between story and characters, the mechanical elements of character progression and the gacha economy, and the game's various resource systems. My initial impression of the story is that although the game has stumbled in oscillating between its darker moments and lighter ones, the mystery surrounding your involvement as the manager of this group of sinners, the company's motivation for bankrolling this crew, and the backstories of the sinners therein that you lead through hell all keep me chained to the game. Chapter 1 sees the origins of our roach-clawed companion Gregor reckon with the realities of the war he was the poster boy for. Peppered throughout are violent interactions between the sinners, with Dante failing to keep the peace. We explore the husk of a lobotomy core branch in search of something that we don't understand for motivations we're kept in the dark about. And by the end of Chapter 1, we, at the very least, know that failure is not an option, and the enemies we must contend with are vast in power and personal in their involvement with each sinner. Chapter 2 pivots from the gloomy note into one of levity, showcasing the sinners bungling their way through a heist with Rodion taking the lead. Although the change in tone does cause whiplash, I've settled on my assessment that these were growing pains Project Moon were suffering from while fleshing out their story. Here, too, we receive information on Rodion's past and learn more of the city and its inhabitants. I will refrain commenting on Chapter 3 too much, but suffice to say that it is my favorite of the chapters so far because this is where PM finds their narrative stride in balancing their comedic and somber moments. This is where the game kicks the player in earnest to contend with the challenges before them, just like the sinners are being forced to, and persevere. The release of Chapter 3.5 in the Hell's Chicken event spells out the framework that PM might be adopting for the future, placing their slapstick and offbeat humor to the fringes of their story to keep the main chapters a tense and intriguing affair, although this is speculation on my part. They've even stated that they plan to keep all of these 0.5 events available for new players that come into the game, which is fantastic from an onboarding perspective because players joining later on won't have missed out on the story beats set by a given event, only the bonus rewards they could have earned if they were there from the jump. The city breeds misery and violence in equal measure, but the narrative itself never feels like it indulges in the suffering of others. It is a fact of the world to be sure, but one that doesn't tax the reader into making the progression a laborious endeavor. If I had to tie all the chapters together, including the event, I'd say that the story is laser focused on themes of atonement and growth. Our companions, including Dante, are sinners. It does not escape me that our keeper, Virgilus, and Dante invoke ideas of the Inferno from which they hail their namesake. Charon vroom-vrooming the sinners through the various circles of hell, a hell of their own making. All of the material here, if I were to separate the story from the extra materials that PM has released in Leviathan or Wonder Labs or Distortion Detective, are incredibly compelling. By the nature of their quest, we get to experience each district of the city in an intimate way and steep ourselves in a storied landscape. The extra materials provide answers to some character motivations and the mechanics of some in-world phenomena, but this is just supplemental to the enjoyment of the work, not required reading. What I love the most about Limbus Company is that because this story is tied to the characters' motivations and backstories, each sinner we use in combat is an entirely fleshed out person with quirks to their personalities that leave each one endearing in their own way. As is tradition with each of Project Moon's works, these characters derive their namesake and backgrounds from some form of lauded piece of literature. Pause the video if you want to do some extra reading to get a grasp of each character's backstory from their literary counterparts. Just to go through a few, Gregor and his association with apples while being ostracized for his monstrous appearance is in line with his book inspiration. Rodion and her guilt for a murder committed in cold blood covers similar ground to Crime and Punishment. Emile Sinclair and, well, you get the idea. Because they are reinterpretations of their literary characters, however, they maintain the benefit of a storied background while having the freedom to indulge in the quirks the authors of this game feel might make them endearing. Gregor, because of his poster boy status as a military veteran and his easygoing attitude, can be quite incompetent, charmingly so. Well-meaning and thoughtful, but naive in a lot of ways. Rodion, instead of being racked with guilt like her literary counterpart, indulges in material vices to keep her mind off such things. She teases the other sinners and makes light of their situation. Sinclair is a baby, and by the end of Chapter 3, I sympathize with the baby. I care about his well-being. The glimmers of his tortured soul in Chapter 2 paid off in spades with the next chapter in ways I didn't expect but entirely appreciate. And these are for the characters we've had stories revolve around. Most of the other sinners still pull their weight when on screen. Otis is the laudable teacher's pet. Her devotion to Dante belies a danger only hinted at in the character profile provided to you of her. Don Quixote is insane, preoccupied with their notions of justice to the point that she's perfectly willing to jeopardize her mission to follow her chivalric code. Heathcliff is British. Need I say more? By the time you've gone through the first 3 chapters, hell, by the end of the first chapter, you should have a tier list of what characters you like over others. I know my list has been in constant flux as I've progressed through the story, and I love that their personalities have had such an impact for me to consider tweaking the list over and over again. Especially for a gacha game whose conceit revolves around variations of these 12 sinners plus Clockhead, the character work is a great show on managing ensemble casts. Not even to speak of the other characters in the story, like Virgilus, or Charon, or Jesse and James. Seriously, anytime Charon is on screen, expect cute dumb shit as the result. Because of the character interactions with one another being sprinkled throughout the story, I am compelled to move forward in part because I want to learn about what paths have led them here and what form of growth will confronting their sins look like. On story and characters alone, Limbus Company is worth your time. Because this is a game though, I need to gush about the gameplay and the flexibility and responsiveness PM has with managing this live service. This game is Connect the Colors the RPG. Each character has skills with a respective color and effect, and there are 3 skills in all for each character. You select from the top or bottom skill in a column and thread the beginning of the line to the end of it, stringing together a series of skills that automatically target the opponent and their respective combat moves. You and the enemy clash against one another. You win or lose the fight depending on the number you roll into, and the fight continues, and this happens all at once. There's resource management to consider because your colored skills give you colored orbs that fuel some passives or fuel powerful skills known as egos. Some passives require you to have a certain number of similarly colored skills to be chained in the line to activate. There are fights where the game eschews the simpler battle system in favor of using a refined version of Library of Ruina's targeting system. I find the game to be fun in the same way I like Connect 4. I like seeing similar colored skills connected to a massive string that increases the amount of damage I deal to my opponent and tickles the lizard part of my brain. Obviously, this game is more complex than Connect 4 though, and that complexity comes from the preparation stage of things, having the right tools for the job. Having a variety of identities to contend with the blisteringly difficult content that the devs have to offer in the Railway, and to a lesser extent the Mirror Dungeons, is how the game entices you into its gacha elements. If what you're seeing on screen doesn't appeal to you, I'd say give the game your time in the tutorial and decide then if you want to avoid moving forward. I'd also like to add that on the game's launch, a lot of the systems that make the game a joy to play now were not there before. Because the game is a live service, and Project Moon is a company that has their pulse on the community they've fostered, they've made fundamental changes to the game for the community's benefit. we received an entire passive overhaul to fall in line with how combats were playing out in the wild. We received a new mechanic in ego overclocking, and the added allure of expending our resources to make an exceptionally powerful attack. Project Moon has been courageous in the way that they've listened to community feedback and changed course towards systems that are player-friendly. Hell, they even compensate the community for such drastic changes by offering premium currency to the players. I find this behavior to be laudable, and I wanted to acknowledge it here because this makes dealing with character progression and the wider resource economy Limbus Company contends with a balanced affair. Identities and lunacy. Where do I begin? So, from my limited understanding, most gacha games gate their content-smashing units behind the paywall. If there is something like a tier list, typically, the free units provided to the players are passable but not great. The way that Limbus Company deals with IDs is that, for one, you only need the unit the one time to gain access to their entire kit. Once you've invested the necessary thread and capped their experience, they're going to be the best they can be. Does this devalue duplicate identities? Almost certainly. But acquiring dupes feeds into the shards system they have in the game, and if you have an abundance of shards that aren't going to see any use for acquiring a character's ID or ego, they can be turned into the item you need, the thread, that unlocks the potential of a given identity. I should mention here that the base character's IDs and egos are automatically threaded when moving from one chapter to another, which means the rare resource that unlocks a unit's final skill and passive can be used exclusively on the IDs and egos that you acquire from the gacha. What's even better is that a number of base egos are just outright better than some of their gacha counterparts. Base Otis, for example, is just leagues better than her Blade Lineage and G-Corp counterparts because of the coin spread on each of her skills and how each skill she has access to feeds into her base ego for consistent clashing. Base Heathcliff is another example who surpasses his Tier 2 counterparts as well. You're still incentivized to collect their identities though, because threading them to the max provides you with a bit of the premium currency, narrative tidbits about their character from another world, and extra shards should you pull them again. And if that's not crazy enough, you collect these boxes from the battle pass and from the dungeons that give you access to even more shards. So if you're trying to acquire a particular ID or ego, just save up the shards necessary to get them in the shard marketplace. Granted, they automatically convert half of your shards into thread when transitioning from Season 1 to Season 2, so you're going to be placed on the back foot the later you enter into a season. But having half of your goal towards something you want is better than losing all those shards outright, especially when you consider that the converted thread can be fed into the egos and IDs that you currently have. As for the Battle Pass itself, it's quite generous. The egos locked behind the premium section of the pass become available after the end of the season when they get thrown into your ego pool, although I'm uncertain if this gets done in Season 2 or Season 3. I paid for the Battle Pass at around $7 and reaped the rewards. I'd recommend if you were planning to acquire the Battle Pass to do so near the beginning of the season if you're a consistent player, or when you've actually finished the damn thing if you're a binge player. The 3 bonus rewards for completing the weekly dungeons, plus the weekly missions, plus the daily missions, means you're averaging 15 levels on the Battle Pass a week, assuming you're consistent in completing everything before your missions reset. This means that a Battle Pass can be completed with roughly 1 month's worth of work. This isn't even including the seasonal BP points you can earn from grinding out your other missions, or the lowered amount of BP you get from running more mirror dungeons, which you get 1 free try at each day. And with their added skip battle function for the content that provides threads and XP tickets, although they cost double the energy to clear this way, they save you a lot more time. If you're trying to min-max your time and resource acquisition, I'd recommend using the skip function on the thread bosses that take up a lot of time, like Golden Apple or Doomsday Clock, and fighting the thread bosses that don't take more than a couple of turns to finish, like the Telepole Wolf with your standard energy investment. Don't use the skip function against the enemies that offer XP tickets because there are missions that require you to clear enemies from the stage, and this is where you'll typically do it. I should also mention that the energy you acquire from leveling up as a manager rolls over from one level to another. You want to save your enkephalin boxes for story content, as these stages require liquid energy to run, but converting your energy into modules once you've finished the stages, or if you're at an overflow, is the name of the game. The character progression and economy of this game is bountiful to the point of absurdity. Consider that this account is one that started with 2 tier 3s and an ego, and look at the amount of stuff I have left. Without the battle pass, I'd guess that I'd be down a character or ego, considering the amount of additional shard boxes you're provided with the battle pass. But even then, the level of progression you can get on an account with a bit of dedication and the generosity of the company is just buck wild. The game has a good flow of content in the upcoming pipeline that has me quite excited in a lot of ways. Content is split up between chapter releases, themed events, dungeon releases, and the railway content. There's a good spread of mainline stuff in the chapters themselves, with events serving as a fun palate cleanser for the next chapter. Considering PM is learning their lesson as to the burnout potential for collecting resources in these side events, we can expect a subdued experience that provides the community with a ton of rewards. Listed as a later release on their update is the Hard Mirror Dungeon, which, if you haven't checked out my first impressions video on Limbus Company, I stated outright that the first iteration of the Mirror Dungeon doesn't become engaging content until you reach the 3rd floor, and by then, it's almost over. Just by virtue of the game mechanics, the hardest encounters are the 1st and 2nd stage of a given run, because you start out with your sanity at neutral, meaning you have a 50-50 chance to pop off on clashes with consistent coin spins. The roadmap states they're releasing a harder form of the Mirror Dungeon, and I'm excited for it. How it will be harder is the key though. Consider this 2nd dungeon as the intermediate content the player should be pushing through, and the beginner dungeon as your stop for quick dailies. Maybe they change the amount of resources that one dungeon provides over the other, so grinding patterns might change. We won't know until it's released. Finally, the railways. The railways are endgame content. The game expects you to have a roster of kitted IDs, and your objective is to clear the railway while managing your resources and the health of your sinners. You don't have the benefit of ego gifts at your disposal. You're incentivized to clear the railway within a certain number of turns to unlock bragging rights banners, but if you want a less trying experience, just stick to completing the thing. They have 2 railways opening up in the coming year, and with it are exclusive bosses and encounter combinations. This is the stuff you're gearing your characters toward, and I feel like they balance the difficulty of this content quite well on their first go. Of the quality of life improvements that I'm waiting on, I hope we get something similar to a compendium with a compilation of all the enemies we've faced who have stories tied to them. Abnormalities, including bosses, have tabs with their origin stories tied to them, or observations made by sinners drafting reports on their encounters with the monsters. Having an in-game location that stores all these reports would be good and make sense contextually as Dante leafing through this report as they travel from district to district. Because Project Moon has been listening to the community consistently, it's not out of the ordinary to ask for a compendium to be placed in the game. From what we can glean of the roadmap and what PM has offered us, Chapter 4 is going to be the longest yet, and it's expected to cover Yi Sang's backstory. The in-between event, the Magic Hell Bus on a Pelagic Adventure, suggests the Chapter 4.5 will start laying the foundation for Ishmael's backstory in Chapter 5, but these are just my inferences. Season 1 of Limbus Company has been a blast to play through, and not just because of my devotion to Project Moon as a company. The gameplay is sound and engaging. The narrative is incredibly captivating. The gacha elements don't feel egregious considering the plethora of resources they shower the players with if you invest a bit of time. There's a good mix of casual, intermediate, and veteran content available, with the structure of their content release pipeline being transparent and hype-inducing. There's a lot to like in Limbus Company. I recommend you book your ticket on the Mephisto as quickly as you can to take advantage of the rewards for Season 1 you might be able to earn. Assuming this video is released on time. In which case, hop on aboard as quickly as possible for Season 2 and avoid missing out on what's to come. This has been Mr. Staleman on Distortions, Dungeons, and Death, signing off.